Hey, so good evening, you guys. Nice to see everybody. Happy impending Thanksgiving. This was always back when I was a Buddhist monk and kind of fumbling awkwardly to figure out how to fit in with regular culture. It was these two holidays a year, Thanksgiving and Mother's Day, that were like solid, clear alignment. So the idea of a whole day focused on gratitude, whatever the others' cultural specifics, the whole idea of a day focused on gratitude is phenomenal. And implicitly, Mother's Day is the same, right? Just a chance to reflect on gratitude to our mothers, through without whom we would not exist for thousands and thousands of reasons. We saved our life thousands and thousands of times. So I wanted tonight to continue talking about leadership, but I wanted to tell a story just inspired by a talk that I'd seen this weekend, which I'd enjoyed a lot as well. So why don't we begin by decompressing a little bit with some meditation and just letting ourselves settle in. So we can close our eyes if that helps, and stretch a bit. Just take a deep breath in and out to reset. And then another breath, just inviting ourselves to relax. And then another breath, just inviting ourselves to think what is important right now. And then we become aware of our body, just getting some inner sense of how we're feeling. So our bodies are huge and complex, that we may forget about them most of the time. Even when we try to pay attention to them, it may feel very small, very narrow. But our body is like an ocean. Trillions of cells, so much complexity. We just try to feel this body and have respect for it. Just taking in this incredible body that sustains us with all of its complexity and all of the feelings it gives rise to. Just opening up to it, acknowledging it. And then we could ask ourselves if our time today could help move us in any direction. What would that be? What is the best result we could hope to come out of this time here? And we just focus on that. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. So this weekend I watched a talk that I posted in the chat just a little while ago by a man named Peter Senge, and he's a business organizational consultant, professor, and so forth. But his focus has been about learning organizations, how organizations can adopt kind of a learning culture and a learning mindset. And his talk was from 1999, so it looks kind of old school, you know, so it's digitized version, some VHS cassette. But it was just really such a rich talk, I thought, just so beautifully explaining a lot and felt very personally relevant for me as well, which I'll explain in a minute. But he was giving, he's a management consultant and professor, business professor, but he was giving a talk at a teachers conference, a conference for teachers, you know, educators about education. And the main thrust of his talk was to point out was a theme that has kind of runs through the business community and the technical community that I'm you know, trying to learn and adopt, which is that the way that our businesses work and the way that education works are very much a product of the Industrial Revolution. Like very much that's kind of how we've structured our schools and structured our workplaces. And I guess you watch the video. If you want it like very nicely explained and all the details filled in, you should watch the video. I'm going to give you the clumsy, incomplete version. So the clumsy, incomplete version is that school and work are the same institution. They're the same institution. And they're basically just some extensions of one another. And they're structured in exactly the same way, basically, where students show up into a class and there's a teacher there, and then workers show up into an office and there's a boss there. And his premise is that we're born learning. Just from the moment you emerge from the womb, probably undoubtedly within the womb as well, you're learning continuously. So he asked the question, rhetorical question, did you learn? Where did you learn how to learn? Was it in school? Did they teach you how to learn? No. You wouldn't have gotten to school if you didn't know how to learn already, right? By the time you got to school, you could already understand words, for example. Where did you learn that? Who taught you to learn? We're born learning. It's innate, and we're also born motivated, and we're born motivated to learn. And so then you might ask, what is school about? You come into school and somebody asks you a question, and what are you supposed to do when the teacher asks a question? Well, you're supposed to give an answer. What kind of answer? You're supposed to give the right answer. You're not supposed to give the wrong answer. And who determines which answer is right? Well, the teacher does. And the teacher is the final, ultimate authority. And he explained it in a very compelling way. But basically, he said the whole purpose of school is not to teach kids how to learn. It's to teach them compliance, how to comply with teachers, how to, be in line, walk in line, not talk out of turn, not copy somebody else's paper, and so forth. And the primary way school is structured is with the idea of motivating kids with rewards, giving them grades and gold stars and compliments and praise, or reprimands and negative grades. And, I used to get these yellow slips or white slips. Yellow slips were behavioral ones. I had a competition with another kid, my best friend in school, about who could get the most yellow slips. And he was number one. I was number two in terms of behavioral problems in elementary school. Then we got white slips when we didn't turn in our homework. And I had an amazing collection of those because I basically I just didn't pay any attention whatsoever when they told me what the homework assignment was. And I would always show up in class the next day and they'd be like, "Do you have your homework?" And I'm like, "My what? Sorry." And to be honest, now 40 years later, I'm still doing it. I'm like, "Oh yeah, oh right, okay." So I got through school because I was good at taking tests and thinking on the fly and so forth. 40 years later, I'm getting through life because I'm good at taking tests, good at thinking on the fly, right? So we sort of adapt from the moment we're little, right? We adapt, and there's certain patterns of behavior that unfold, but they're patterns of behavior about dealing with others, other kids, and our peers, but they're also patterns of behavior about dealing with authority and power. And one of the things I've noticed about myself is that I'm very timid around people in power, right? So I'm like, there's always this cringing. I'm really trying to fight and train myself out of this, but there's a sort of cringing. I've never been beaten in my life, almost at all. I beat my brother a lot, but otherwise, I had a very fortunate upbringing, but there's still this cowering and cringing, right? Power and threat and so forth. And we do it, right, in companies today. If you don't perform, month after month after month, what happens? You're fired, right? Clearly, there's a threat. There's always an implicit threat. If you do perform well, you get promoted, you get praise, you get awards, and so forth. So still always this external, or you could say extrinsic sense of motivators for good behavior or for bad behavior. But fundamentally, even a reward implies there's some threat of punishment, right? Because then if you don't get awards ever for a long period of time and you're the last one, then implicitly it's the same system. Reward, punishment, they're both two sides of the same coin. But what's interesting is, so he made a beautiful analogy, right? He said, first of all, he qualified. He said almost everything he knows about education is from being a student in school and from being a parent. So he was not a professional educator, so he had to qualify his talk because he was talking to all these professional educators. But he said, kids are naturally motivated. They're born being motivated. And if you really want to see them motivated, watch them playing a video game. Just instinctively, they are learning moment by moment in that video game, and they're trying to get to the next level. And you can take a kid who shows up in school and seems to be utterly apathetic, utterly unmotivated, and the teachers are like, this kid's got a motivation problem, just can't be motivated. Parents are like, he's got a motivation problem. They go home and they get on the video game console and they're like, going from level 0 to level 10 and, defeating all, winning every level. So intensely motivated. Intensely learning. We're born motivated. There's an intrinsic natural motivation. And he gave this quite a telling analogy. He said, okay, so you have this kid who's not really engaged, not really motivated, not really liking school. And they go home, and what do? They throw themselves into video games. And at the end of every level of video game, normally there's like some big challenge. And normally, what is it? You've got to kill this big, monster or whatever. And what is that monster called? The boss, right? The big boss, the boss of that level. That's the sort of vernacular. And so you have these kids who are like, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old kid, whatever, or adults. They are barely engaged and barely motivated. And they go home and they're really engaged. They're fantasizing about what? Killing the boss. So it's like, so he said, these kids know what's going on. They know from a very young age exactly what's going on in society, where you've got this, this micro, I don't know what it is, micro class conflict or something like that. But what's interesting is that we try to motivate people through these extrinsic rewards, but people are intrinsically motivated, just naturally, right? We're intrinsically motivated to do all kinds of things, including to learn, right? And to be creative. And it's just, although no question, it's not always easy to get our intrinsic motivations lined up with other people in such a way that we can collectively do something that's useful. But historically, if you look at animals, right? Animals, what do little animals do? They play and they play fight and they forage. And what they're doing is they're rehearsing these behaviors that are very useful. If you're an animal, if you're a dog and you learn to play fight, well, you use that when you're hunting. If you're a rabbit and you run away, you're chasing each other, well, you use that when you're trying to get away from other animals. So we naturally, from a young age, animals have quite an advantage. Humans, a little bit awkward, right? Because our society is so complex. And so what we've done is we've tried to build a structure for work and build a structure for education that are the same structure and are focused around extrinsic rewards, money, raises, recognition, whatever. So my resume is now decorated. I didn't have a resume for a long time, and now I have a resume. It's thoroughly decorated. I've got all these sort of things that I've done and so forth. So I've got all these extrinsic signs that I'm worth hiring or not firing. It's a defense mechanism, right? Because it's a society focused on extrinsic rewards. But what do people really thrive at? It's intrinsic motivation. So that's why I've always loved things like math and programming and so forth, because you can really absorb into those and they're naturally intrinsically motivating. The things that you really love to do, you wouldn't, people, wouldn't even have to pay you. You do them in your free time. That's why you find people, who are carpenters in their free time, or computer programmers in their free time, or gardeners in their free time. There's a lot of very useful skills that we're intrinsically motivated to do. And so what happens is that if people are repeatedly entrained to focus on extrinsic motivations and then what happens is gradually the intrinsic motivation atrophies, and it feels less and less and less relevant or useful. And in our spare time, we do all the fun stuff, right? But at work, we just sort of game the system, do what we have to do, and plod through and try to check all the boxes. But there's something a bit broken about that whole system, because you're not actually capturing all of this raw intelligence, this raw passion to learn, this raw motivation that every single human being is born with. We all of our brains basically weigh the same amount, have roughly the same number of neurons, and they're connected in different ways, maybe good at different things, but we basically all have this phenomenal capacity. But we can only really draw that out if we're engaged, if we're really excited about what we're doing. And the reason I mentioned this first of all, I should probably explain in the context of leadership. Then, what is the role of a boss? Right now, I'm a boss again. I was an individual contributor for about a year. Now I'm a boss again. I've got a couple of people who report to me. So then I'm thinking, okay, do I really want to be a boss, and how do I be a good boss? So part of me is thinking, okay, to be a boss, I've got to tell people exactly what to do, and I've got to know what they're doing, and I've got to control what they're doing. And there is the analogy of the industrial age is a machine, right? An organization is like a machine. And so machine, how does that work? It's something that you control from the outside, right? A machine is something that has a steering wheel, maybe it has some gauges, and the steering wheel allows you to control it. The gauges let you know how it's doing, right? So what are the gauges in the education system? Grades, test scores, right? No child left behind. What are the grades and what are the gauges in the working system? Output, or how much sales did you make this quarter? There's a lot of gauges, right? And then what are the controls? What are the levers? But it's all, the analogy of a machine is about somebody else controlling things. And so if the boss is supposed to be the one who's controlling things like a machine, that's a very different, and that's one mental model, right? And so if I'm thinking I've got to know everything that these people who report to me are doing, and I've got to control them and make sure that they're doing right, that leads to one pattern of behavior. But if I think, okay, these people are smarter than I am, or as smart as I am, they certainly know their own field better than I do. What do I need to do? I need to basically stay out of their way, make sure that they are generally pointed in the right direction, and give them whatever help that they need, and make sure that, basically just provide whatever help that I need, that people naturally will collaborate and work together. And so if you can, anyway, that's my personal challenge, trying to invert my way of thinking about management to something that's focused on how every individual has this natural drive and curiosity and wish to learn, and you just need to basically create the conditions for them to thrive, and it creates a totally different dynamic. So the bit about the whole thing that I found personally relevant was something that I'd only kind of remembered just in the last year or so, which is that I had been depressed all through elementary school. Basically, like all, as and it's now it's a memory of a memory of a memory. But basically, every single day at the end of elementary school, I wanted to die. I thought, what is the point? I could tell that I was basically just being groomed to go into the working world, and all the adults looked pretty miserable, going about their working business, and and that people were just spending all their money, seeing all these advertisements, they're convincing them to buy things, spending all their money, so they had to work more, and they all looked miserable, and it was a terrible system, and it was all driven by advertisements, and it was, you know, I'm like, what's the point? I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to follow that path. I don't want to be like these adults that I'm seeing. And so every day, as best I can remember, throughout elementary school, I just wanted to die. I just thought, I don't really think I want to be here. So I just, before the class, I thought, okay, how common is it? The answer is it's pretty common, right? That kids in elementary school have different, according to the website that I pulled up, Cleveland Clinic tells me that, 7% of kids have some kind of a diagnosable behavioral disorder, if you want, anxiety or behavioral problems, and 3% of them have depression. But in general, the rates have been going up, and I shudder to think what 2020 has done to those rates as well. And I look at what are the causes of, what are the causes of depression and anxiety in children? So the Cleveland Clinic tells me alcohol or drug use of the child, presumably, if environment, including family problems, family history, others in the family with depression, physical illness, or stressful life events. What I notice is conspicuously missing on there is existential terror of nuclear annihilation, existential threat of climate change induced destruction, the existential crushing weight of industrialization. None of those are listed on the Cleveland Clinic's website because they're not anything that the Cleveland Clinic can fix, right? It's not anything, but they are legitimate causes of anxiety and depression, right? So even as a young child, you can be very attuned to these things. So even I remember seeing the children, baby boomers and so forth, who were growing up during the peak of the nuclear tensions in the 60s and so forth. Almost all of them, or something like 60%, had regular nightmares about atomic war and so forth. So the whole trajectory of my life, the reason I mentioned anyway, is because the whole trajectory of my life was set from that. From that time, 10 or 11, whatever, I thought I didn't want to follow a conventional path. And, 10 years later, that led to me becoming a Buddhist monk and sort of disappearing from society for 15 years or so. And now I've come back, right? And now my big epiphany now is, look, all of these people in the workplace, there's so much virtue, there's so much good intention, there's all this sort of raw goodness that's circulating. It's like the blood, like the blood in our vessels. So the goodness and generosity and honesty and so forth that's involved in all of the interchanges in our business world. It's like the blood, the life energy that's flowing through our business world. And I'm like, look at all this virtue. It's amazing. When I was an arrogant, isolated Buddhist monk, we thought we had a monopoly on virtue. And then I come back in all the cold, cruel business world and all these virtuous people, everybody's so generous and patient and kind. And wow, I had no idea. We thought we were the only one trying to be virtuous. So that's my current fascination. But the lesson from that is that little kids are super smart, right? And back to Peter Senge, this professor, who's the author of a book called The Fifth Discipline, by the way, but he said 2-year-olds are incredibly smart. They know, they've learned how to control the entire household. They figure out how to get their parents to do whatever they want, right? Obviously, there's a lot of learning going on there, right? How could they possibly do that if they were not learning exactly how to manipulate all of the adults around them? So an incredible power, right? They're maybe not as articulate as the adults, but they make it work. Just scream in the right times, and they make it work. So children are intelligent. Children are attuned to this this system, we're facing these I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, right? We have these incredibly challenging existential crises that we're facing. But that there is this, this rich humanity in all of us, right? This natural motivation, this natural goodness, um, this inclination towards learning that everybody has. And it's just that the techniques that we used through the industrial age and so forth to try to think about how to get humans to work together and um, have a lot of side effects and don't necessarily work very well and don't maximize. Treating people or organizations as machines does not maximize one's individual capabilities or capacity, but we can learn new ways of interacting with one another, of seeing ourselves and others, to try to reawaken and draw out all of those beautiful innate resources that we all have within us. So that's what's been sort of inspiring me of late. So just wanted to pass that along. But I thought in meditation, obviously, what you actually do when your eyes are closed is entirely your business. So who knows what you actually do in meditation? But one possible topic that we could take to heart is just thinking, that inspires me, for example, is just thinking about this beauty of human beings being born naturally motivated, inclined to learn, with this natural potential for goodness, and that the social characteristics for goodness are a very strong innate part of our mind, empathy and so forth, and perhaps just reflect on that with respect to ourselves and others. But, all right, so why don't we finish up with a bit of meditation like that? And all right, thanks. So we can again just settle in for meditation. Again, resetting, bringing our attention back to our breathing, allowing ourselves to relax if there's any tension that's accumulated. And then if we like, we can just reflect on how we were born learning. Even in the womb, we were learning, born motivated. And that we have natural tendencies for goodness that come from our empathy. And that we share these in common with everyone else. We can just deeply enjoy and rejoice and hold this in our hearts for a bit. Since we and others have a natural motivation to learn, innate goodness, we can ask, how can we draw out that natural potential, that natural tendency from ourselves and from the people around us? How can we help reawaken that drive to learn in the people around us and ourselves? And we can think through this short time together, our minds have changed, our lives have changed in some tiny ways. What are the best kinds of results that might arise from this, spending our time in this way? What kinds of good results could unfold for ourselves and others? Just let ourselves imagine for a moment. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation.